G'day, I'm Patrick from Douglas Fir Design. Welcome to the Router Bits. If you've got any interest in woodwork or joinery, then you would have heard of a mortise and tenon joint. It's a really common and really strong way to join two pieces of wood, usually at right angles like that. It can be done a whole bunch of ways. Traditionally they're done with hand saws and chisels. I like to use a router table to do these joints because it allows me to do them really accurately, especially if I have a whole bunch that I need to repeat, like 5 or 6 over and over. Rather than getting every cut right with a hand saw, I have it all set up so that I can just do it over again and it's accurate every time. When you're creating a mortise and tenon joint, there's 2 separate pieces that you're trying to create. There's the mortise, which is the hole, and the tenon, which is the bit that sticks into the hole. They obviously have to match up really tightly if you want a really nice strong joint. There's plenty of really good resources that'll teach you what kind of ratios you should be looking for with the size of your tenon and the size of your pieces. For this demo, I'm using 32mm stock, and I decided to create a 19mm tenon just because that was the bit that I had on hand. And it will create a pretty strong joint. You want to make sure that your mortise is placed exactly central in the piece of stock that you're working on so that your cheeks are the same size, and you can do that with a test piece once you've set up your router fence at the right depth. Test it on one side, do a quick measurement, and you can also flip it around and test it on the other side and make sure that those holes perfectly match up. I've marked where I want my mortise in the middle of this piece, and I've also marked where the edges of the timber will be just for my reference. Continue these lines around up onto the edge of the piece so that I can see them when I'm routing. And I'm going to line those up with some lines I'm drawing on a piece of tape here, and those lines correspond with the edge of the router blade. I've used that to set 2 stops here and here, which means that these mortises, if I do a bunch of them, are all going to be exactly the same size without me having to eyeball it and get the lines to match up every single time. Now that we've cut the mortise, we need to cut the tenons, and we need to make sure that they match up. So I'm going to use the actual mortise piece as my guide to set the height to cut the tenons. What I'm going to do is lay this on the table, raise the bit up so that it sits exactly where that edge of the mortise is, and lock it off. Alright, so I've set the height of this mortising bit at the exact height of the edge of that mortise inside the other piece. I've actually set the teeth just fractionally below the level of the mortise so that our tenon will be oversized. It's a lot easier to carve a tenon down than get one that's too small and have to start again. Alright, the next thing that we need to do is set the depth of the tenon. In this case, we've created a mortise hole which is 19mm deep, so we want the length of the tenon to also be 19mm. Because this is a 19mm bit, all I need to do is bring the bit directly to the fence. It's just touching. Once this is clamped down and it's turned on, it'll spin freely without a problem. We then need to move this tenon piece along the fence, and it's important to keep it perpendicular. And for that purpose, I like to clamp it to a little wooden square like this and use that as an extra handle and to make sure that it doesn't move. Next thing we're going to do is cut the shoulders off this tenon. We want to make sure the tenon is exactly the same width as our mortise. And our mortise is exactly 42mm, so we've just got to make sure that our tenon is exactly the same as well. So the height of the router bit will depend on that. Alright, so what we've managed to create so far is this round mortise and this square tenon. Obviously that's not going to work so well. They do fit, but you're going to have to cut those corners off. There's two ways of doing it. You can either cut that round mortise into a square using a chisel, and that works pretty well. You can also cut that square tenon into more of a rounded shape so that it matches perfectly with the mortise, and I'm going to give that a shot now. What I'm going to use for this is I've got a 19mm piece of dowel, which is going to give me the exact radius that I need for those corners. So I hold that on the end so it perfectly matches up with the edges. Trace around that on both ends, and that's going to be the guide and the material that I need to take off. And you'll see that that shape should match up perfectly with the mortise. Alright, so I just spent quite a bit of time carving this tenon so that it fit the mortise perfectly, the round mortise. It was really time consuming, and from experience, cutting the mortise to be a square is a lot simpler, especially if your tenon is going to be a bit longer and you have to do a lot of them. You're going to get better results much more quickly. We created this mortise and tenon using a morticing bit, which worked well because it was only quite a shallow cut of about 19mm. If you want to create a really deep mortise and tenon, you'd probably be better off using a straight bit, and all of what I demonstrated there could also be used with a standard straight bit. Where these mortising bits really excel is for shallow mortises, like in a hinge mortise. The reason they do that so well is because they have a hollow centre. They eject chips really efficiently, and it means you can do these kinds of mortises over and over really quickly. I've made a little jig here which is going to help me cut the mortises for my hinges over and over. I'll give it a shot now. Alright, I've got a perfect 3mm mortise for the hinge. All I'll need to do now is just cut out those rounded corners with a chisel. Won't take very long, and it's a much cleaner mortise than I could have created by hand with a chisel, and it's quicker too. These mortising bits are really the only bit for the job if you're trying to create a really shallow mortise and you need to follow a template or a pattern. All of the other pattern following bits are really long, and that's just going to get in the way, and you'll have to make a jig that's way too thick. So that's where these really come into their own. This is a stair tread bit. They come in 4 different sizes, including a 35mm and a 45mm, and what they're used for is cutting the channel in your diagonal riser that the stair tread will slot right into to get a nice tight fit straight away. You can get these Torquata router bits online at timbecon.com.au, or you can grab them in store at either the Perth or the Melbourne stores.